Just a heads up, this video contains swearing and is not aimed for kids, if me marking my video as not for kids wasn't enough of an indicator. Greetings my faithful watchers on YouTube, and welcome to my first video of the 2020 decade. I'm still not a full-time YouTuber, as I still don't have a video download system, and I'm still deciding where I'm going to go with my career and how YouTube is going to factor into it, if it does. Either way, what better way to start off this decade with a video rant on Mr. Enter? Yay! I've already made it clear that I've had a lot to reprimand Mr. Enter for in the past, and I once said that it was quite possible that I would have more to call him out for in the future, and after seeing what some of his plans for this year are, and some of the stuff he's been putting out in his Nick-O-Rama series, boy do I ever! The reason I've chosen this particular episode of Nick-O-Rama is that I heard, through a combo of something his editor and something else on DeviantArt once said, that Mr. Enter's been receiving some death threats for this Nick-O-Rama video on the show Tigre. I don't know if the watchers of the video have really been going that far. If they have been, that is certainly unacceptable and wrong to do under any circumstance. That having been said, though, I do find Mr. Enter's video on Tigre to be pretty horrendous. And for the record, I don't say that as someone who loves Tigre and can't stand listening to anyone talking trash about it, because honestly, my memories on the show are a little fuzzy. This is partially due to it airing on weekend mornings, or at least that would be the only time my sister would be allowed to watch it. This is part of the reason why I'm generally better at standalone movies than TV series or entire franchises. From what I've been able to regather about the show Tigre, I would say it holds up just okay. Still nowhere near levels of cringe that Mr. Enter makes it out to be in his video. Let's proceed, shall we?
So, in a lot of my older videos, I said that El Tigre was good. I thought that it was. And, oh boy, was I wrong. El Tigre is one of the Nicktoons that I actually had high hopes for going in, thinking that I'd be seeing this new underrated classic that I'd ever seen. You know, like I got with Cat Scratch. What I got here was a piece of poop.
I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. My problem with Mr. Enter isn't that he's overtly negative or that he often defaults to negativity. Not really. It's more that he has tendency to gauge in bad faith criticism when it's something he doesn't like, especially in recent years. And I'm not talking about him bashing something just because I happen to like it, because in my humble opinion, how much you love or hate whatever movie or show a critic is reviewing should be among the last factors to deciding the merits of the review itself. No, when I talk about bad faith criticism, that includes things like misinformation, logical fallacies, and being so caught up in personal biases that you say things like, well, just watch and see.
Although there were probably a few clues that I should have noticed that would let me in on the show not being as good as I actually thought it was. For one, it won a bunch of Emmys. The Emmys are like the worst award show in the world by what they pick. And when we're speaking about the world of award shows, that's astounding. Let me put it this way, El Tigre has the most Emmy Awards of any Nicktoon, except for one, Fanboy and Chum Chum.
Okay, a few things here. In all honesty, yeah, I think award shows are bullshit and can be easily rigged or biased regardless of how well received they are by critics and general audiences. Or there are instances where I simply have no idea what they see in it for it to be considered award-worthy material. However, if we're going by Enter's logic here that the Emmys are bad by default, then I suppose every Emmy winner or nominee is garbage. SpongeBob, Arthur, Tiny Toons, Charlie Brown, Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog, etc. I get that he's trying to say that the fact that this show nabbed up so many awards in its runtime should have raised some eyebrows, but that's not how his attitude comes across. It comes across just more of a classic case of, yeah, these award shows nominated a show that you don't like, big fucking deal.
If you want to watch a superhero show with heavy Mexican themes, then watch Mucha Lucha. And when you get down to it, Mucha Lucha is this show, but better in literally every single way. And I'm really glad that the creator of the show moved on to bigger and better things. The Book of Life is a really, really good movie, and it is so much better than El Tigre in every single way.
For the record, I did watch Mucha Lucha when I was a kid, and it was a great show. I have a lot of fond memories of it. Clearer memories than I do of El Tigre, admittedly. And I really like the Book of Life and even consider it to be fairly underrated and deserving of more credit than some people have given it.
The show does have its own unique art style, which I do kind of like. The problem is that it's one of those styles that looks good in single drawings, but in actual motion it looks really bad.
I've never really found the look of this show hard on the eyes, even and including when there's action going on, but then again, maybe that's just because I've seen worse. This is one nitpick from Mr. Enter that I'm going to let slide.
And the gimmick of the show is that his father is a superhero and his grandfather is a supervillain. And the entirety of the show is about his slow realization that he's eventually going to become a supervillain. Actually, that sounds a lot cooler and gives a lot more credit than what the show actually does. The actual premise that's presented to us is that Manny must decide whether to fall into villainy or rise up into being a hero. That actually sounds like a really interesting premise. It is a really interesting premise, at least on the surface of it. Technically speaking, any show with morality lessons is about that. Good versus evil. It's a common theme, and it is not groundbreaking.
Since when does a premise have to be groundbreaking to have intrigue? Maybe the reason that the concept of deciding between good and evil is so common in fiction is because it's relatable, like how every one of us is inevitably faced with the decision to do what's right versus what's easy. Heck, Jorge Gutierrez said that the premise of Manny with a hero for a father and a villain for a grandfather stems from his memories of his own father and his own grandfather and their different professions and personalities when he approached them. You remember that Fairly Odd Parents episode that talks about the whole story where the Crimson Chin became enemies with the Bronze Kneecap because he tripped him during a sports match, broke his knee and sabotaged his competition, and refused to apologize for it? All I'm saying is that heroes aren't exactly saints either, and can even be sometimes just as much to blame as the villains.
What is groundbreaking with this show is how appealing they make evil seem.
The Disney villains say hi!
Manny's father's pathetic. Like, one of the most pathetic father figures I've ever seen in any cartoon ever. I mean, he's the traditional form of pathetic. He's a wimp, constantly crying and has a mental breakdown every other episode.
What, you're saying that men can't have vulnerable sides? Like heroes have to put up with so much emotional and mental shit that they can't spend all their dark hours brooding and they can only express themselves by letting it all out? I've had several breakdowns, even when trying to mask the misery I was going through to maintain a professional stand through both school and in a work environment. Plus, there's also the factor that his father might be emotionally traumatized by the fact that his wife had a divorce with him, out of fear that this kind of hero work would make for a dangerous condition to raise a family. That might also play a part.
Like I said, El Tigre is fairly groundbreaking because they claim that cheating was far better than fair play. Because if you play fair, you will lose and everyone will hate you. And you should cheat anyway because everyone else is doing it.
As if other shows, including Nicktoons, didn't have questionable morals at times, even in episodes that weren't awful. Or how about that episode in Fairly Odd Parents where Timmy lends Cosmo and Wanda to Vicky's sister Tootie, not so much out of compassion for Tootie, but rather because he didn't want to feel guilty about discarding her invitations to her birthday.
Also, they called it soccer despite being a show with Hispanic themes. You know, soccer, the game that's called football in every Hispanic place in the world.
Or here's a wild possibility. Maybe they refer to it as football in the international language dubs, but only keep it as soccer in the English so that we uncultured Americans watching at home don't get confused. Referring to another Nick show for a minute, Ned's Declassified, in its final season, the Brazilian exchange student, Fame and Fortune, who is considered a soccer prodigy in his home country, still refers to it as soccer in his conversations with the other characters. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that even in Brazil it's called football.
The police wear sombreros that have the word police on them. The Spanish word for police is policia, which I think their target audience would probably be able to understand.
Also, if we were going by your example with the police, then technically Ratatouille is poorly researched because it partakes in a lot of classic images and tropes associated with Parisian life, and there are some simple words in it that are not written in French.
Quite honestly, El Tigre can feel very stereotypical. And I'm not talking like to an offensive degree or anything. It just feels like an outsider looking into Mexican culture and doing the bare minimum to make a show with Mexican themes. And this really shouldn't be the case because I know for a fact that the creator of the show knows a lot about Mexican culture. You know, the fact that he is Mexican, and the fact that he went on to make the Book of Life.
You do know that just because it's a culture or a heritage depicted or portrayed in media by someone of said culture or heritage doesn't mean it can't be stereotypical, right? Case in point, the crows from Dumbo. It's argued that they were meant to be caricatures of black jazz swingers of the time, similar to the vultures in the Jungle Book, and it's true that 4 out of 5 of them are played by actual black actors, and I've heard it said that the leader of them was not really called Jim in the original cut, but that's what history stuck him with. But regardless, I don't think anyone nowadays is going to defend them as a flattering ethnic portrayal. But, as an animation enthusiast, Senor Enter, you should really be familiar with a classic cartoon character who is perceived to be a Mexican stereotype by the majority, except for, wouldn't you know it, Mexicans! That's right, I'm talking about Speedy Gonzales.
Look, I'm sorry, but when Dora the Explorer is willing to get more cultural than you, I'm gonna have a bit of an issue with your show.
Well, I'm sorry, dude, but the issue is on you then, not Jorge. Because he said, when he was directing the Book of Life, that he deliberately didn't send his artists on a trip to Mexico because he felt that it would give them too much of a tourist flavor of the culture. Instead, he wanted it to come from his own personal life experiences.
This stuff, though, it would all be forgivable if the writing wasn't so god-awful. This show has objectively terrible writing.
Okay, what the fuck? Is that seriously where you're going here? This is what I mean when I say that Mr. Enter engages in bad faith criticism. This sentence right here, where he takes it upon himself to declare what is objective in the book of bad writing, just goes to show how he is so preoccupied with his own worldview, which, in essence, is the kiss of death for good faith criticism. You know, Mr. Enter, for someone who says that Josh Scorcher is one of your idols and biggest influences, you don't seem to have watched him a whole lot or taken much regard for what he's said in his analyses.
Yes, it is good to give an honest opinion, but there's a difference between being honest and being blunt. Or as my homeboy Dr. Emerson Eggerichs says, you can be right, but wrong at the top of your voice. Just because you may be right doesn't mean you're entitled to be a dick about it. It's fun watching that critic give those guys a what for until they trash something that you love or value. And I know some people are just gonna say something like, they just can't handle the truth. The real world isn't gumdrops and rainbows. To those people I say, yeah, you're right. And you're not helping.
But then again, this isn't the first time Jorge has had comments like this slung at his work.
So I'm going to bring drawings that I think this is what they want to see. So I brought drawings of The Simpsons and Mickey Mouse and Looney Tunes and Scooby-Doo, basically all the stuff you're not supposed to do. But I also brought a portfolio with all my paintings. And so I get in line, and there's a guy named Jules Engel, and there's a super buff guy that looked like a sculpture in front of me with a steel portfolio. And Jules picked them up like x-rays, and he said, "That's it? You have nothing to say? No."
The joke about honesty keeps coming up because in the first 3 episodes in a row, they're pretty much all about Manny lying. Again and again and again, refusing to learn his lesson. This is a show where the good guys don't seem to get anywhere. Not to mention, there's only so many times that you can kidnap pets for reward money, or poison a sea dog before you become an irredeemable little shit.
Are you familiar with TJ Detweiler from Recess, who enjoys taunting authorities, smooth-talking his way out of school assignments, and even conning his fellow students into doing his work for him in a few instances? Or going back to Ned's Declassified for a minute, there's Cookie, whose characteristics include being pretty egocentric and a frequent liar just to impress girls.
You tend to be the summation of your 5 closest friends, and well, Frida is evil. Like, legitimately an evil character. If Manny wasn't going to turn into a villain, then she would have eventually. Now there's a series. 2 kids were once best friends, but one of them decided that they needed to uphold the values of good and justice, but his best friend fell into the worlds of villainy.
I've already seen that concept before. The first example I can think of off the top of my head is Mike Wazowski and Randall from Monsters, Inc. That is, if we were to count Monsters University. But speaking of villainy versus heroism, you know the saying, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain? That's largely why I'm not interested in making video commentaries like these that much, because I know that I myself am just as susceptible to misinformation and personal bias, despite my best efforts, and that I can speak falsely about people's motives, and it's bound to attract heat from the fans of whomever I'm commentating on. But it's also exactly why I feel compelled to make them when I do, because reviewers who make reviews like this are prone to falling into some of these kinds of traps. It's not exactly helpful to tell someone which ways they should improve at the exact moment when all their faults come crashing down on them and become the ultimate undoings of their lives. This is why I'm expressing my frustrations with Enter here and now. He may or may not hear what I have to say about him, and if he does, it's possible he might dismiss it, but if he does, that's his decision. For those of you watching who happen to be huge fans, or even just average fans of Jorge's work, I will highly recommend watching Finn the Pony's 2 videos on El Tigre and the Book of Life. They are well researched, full of enthusiasm, and even got recognition from Jorge himself. As for Mr. Enter, I'll see you in my next commentary on him, whatever/whenever that might be.